So next up, Scott, we're going to do one of the most fun things that one can do with coffee, and probably the piece that I'm most excited to be here at the Culinary Institute Greystone campus, and that is we're going to talk a little bit about how well coffee pairs with foods. If you think about it for a second, most people don't just drink their coffee. They have it with breakfast, or they have it with something that they're going to eat. Right. And so the choices that you make when you pair with coffee can sometimes be deliberate, and you can really do some things to bring out the characteristics of the coffee and also the characteristics of the food. So I'm so excited to see what you have here. I know that you've been working on 3 specific pairings for the 3 coffees that we selected. The first coffee that we're going to pair with is this organic shade-grown Mexico. And if you think about what we've been talking about earlier, we know that this is a washed coffee, and we know that it is going to be a bit brighter on your palate. Right. In fact, sometimes we talk about this coffee as being somewhat citrusy or lemony.
That's what I found when I tasted it.
Perfect.
And that was just, it lent me to citrus is either lime, orange, or lemon. But lemon has more of a ting and a tang, and I figured, okay, that's going to pull the coffee together with the lemon. So we have a little lemon curd tart with a walnut pâte sucrée. So the walnut gives you a little bit of bitterness, which pairs well also with this coffee. So you have bitter and citrus at the same time.
Excellent. Oh, that sounds great. And we're going to move that just a little bit. I can't wait to taste this. So I've poured you some coffee, and I'm going to have my first little taste here.
I think it's a good pairing.
It's really lovely creaminess. The tartness from the pastry is very similar to me to what happens with juicy coffee. And in this case, what happens is very similar in that the front end of the taste of the coffee, which is bright right away, is very similar to the taste of the food that you prepared. So they really work quite well together.
And I think the lemon tart kind of pulls the finish of the coffee out, and it kind of keeps it going instead of a longer finish as opposed to the shorter finish.
Fantastic. Can I have the recipe for this?
Definitely.
Oh, cool. It's very delicious.
Very simple and in the family.
Excellent. So next up, we have one of the most popular coffees, in fact, the most popular most weeks of the year. This is Cafe Verona. And of all the coffees that we've had today, this is the first one that is a blend. So the coffees we've been focusing on today have been single origin coffees. If you think about it, each one has been from the country where we call out the name of the country, in this case Mexico, and in the others the same. In the case of Verona, we have the luxury of essentially being the chefs, if you will, and we create a blend. And in this case, this is a blend which has a long history with us. In fact, it was the first coffee that was created for Starbucks in the 1970s by Starbucks for food service. In fact, it was done for a restaurant in Seattle at their request, and in the first Starbucks store it wasn't available for sale. But what happened was the people came to the restaurant and they tried the coffee and asked where it came from, and they said it came from a small shop down in the Pike Place Market called Starbucks, and people would go there and say, we'd love that coffee that we had at the restaurant.
So they demanded it.
So they demanded it, and we created it. We made it a retail offering. It's a blend of Latin American coffees with a little bit of Asia Pacific, with a small amount of dark roast coffee. And so what that does is it gives you the really lovely balance of a little bit of that juicy tartness that we've been talking about, finished up with a little bit of rich mouthfeel, almost a syrupy quality, and then the very end of the coffee's blend, which is a darker roasted coffee. It's an Italian roast that we add to it. What that does is it adds a little bit of sweetness. So I see that you have you had the information about that coffee, and you've made us a great pairing. So what did you make?
That's the chocolate I got from the Italian dark roast, and it kind of finished with this sweet, chocolatey flavor. So it made sense to go with chocolate. And this is we call it a molten volcanic chocolate cake. The center is a dark truffle that's been placed in there, and then you bake it. So when it comes right out of the oven, you have it kind of oozing on the plate.
Great.
So a really nice Valverona chocolate we're using, and garnished with a simple tempered white and dark chocolate.
Oh, fantastic. It's really quite beautiful and pretty simple. I have to tell you that there's a number of people in the coffee department in Seattle who would love to be standing where I'm standing right now, because there's a lot of chocolate fans there. So why don't we take a taste of this? Here is a spoon for you. Fantastic coffee.
Definite. And there's a difference between the citrus first coffee and this one that I definitely think will go well with this chocolate.
It's amazing. What a mouth-coating feeling.
And one thing about the chocolate is there's the chocolate dessert. There's not a lot of sugar in it, so it kind of keeps it with the flavor of the chocolate. And it's a flourless cake, so you have your eggs and a little bit of powdered sugar and your chocolate and butter, and that's that. So it doesn't overpower the coffee, I don't think.
But they work extraordinarily well together in the sense that I can still, even after having some coffee, I can still find the finish of the chocolate.
Right.
And the richness. It's almost like the sweetness of the Italian roast is complemented by the sweetness of the finish of the pastry.
Definitely.
Wow, that's delicious. Fantastic. So our last coffee is going to be this beautiful Sumatra, which comes from the island of Sumatra in the Asia Pacific. And of all of the coffees that we sell that come from individual places, in this case Sumatra, this is the most popular. Our customers really love this coffee. And what they look for in this coffee is that syrupiness that we've been talking about. It's a coffee that has sometimes herbal notes, and it is definitely a rich experience. In fact, it sits in the category that we describe sometimes as a bold category, which really refers to the experience that you have with the coffee.
Right.
And so it's definitely not, it's not a small coffee experience. And so oftentimes we don't go the pastry route with this coffee. And in this case, in fact, you've chosen something else for us to taste. So what's that?
So Sumatra is one of my favorite coffees, and when I've paired this in restaurants in my past, I've always kind of done a cheese plate with it, and sometimes maybe some port-soaked cherries and a little cracker, so for the texture. But I like a real creamy cheese. This is a Mount Tam Cowgirl, triple creme, and it's gonna be great. A cheddar wouldn't work because the cheddar would wash away the coffee, but this is gonna, once again, play with the coffee back and forth.
Fantastic.
So,
yeah, it's one of my favorite cheeses, and I'm really glad that you've selected it. Excellent. So there's some Sumatra.
So if I was doing a pairing with coffee, you would go with this type of cheese, maybe a couple different varieties, and I think a blue would be too much. So
So I have to taste this cheese. Got very quiet here all of a sudden with the cheese and the
Definitely.
coffee. So this is a great pairing. It really, both flavors are so big, but they both work sort of complementing each other quite well.
yeah, it's really interesting how they, similar to the chocolate, they play off of each other. Very good balance.
Yeah, so you can see that these aren't the only food pairings, but in each case, we've tried to take some of the descriptive terms that go with the coffee and selected a food that would pair, and you've done a really marvelous job at doing that. We could have done it the opposite way as well. I think sometimes if you think about the foods that you love, and then you begin to think about, well, what coffee would I select? You can use that same method of kind of looking for those descriptive terms that describe, and most often you can find a coffee that will be really well suited for whatever food you're going to have.
The same method of matching coffee to food is kind of how we do coffee to wine. You can taste the wine and say, well, it has some cherry notes to it, so I'm going to pair it with a duck with a cherry sauce, or a Pinot Gris with a nice scallop. And this is the same. We have the same kind of vocabulary with tasting coffee and tasting food and what matches.
Right, and it's funny, I think oftentimes people are surprised that there is that vocabulary that exists around coffee, but given the beauty and the diversity of coffees that are available in the world today, I think anybody who's interested in kind of exploring coffee the way that one explores wine can really find a whole world of taste sensations that they might not experience if they weren't a little bit adventurous. So thank you so much. These are fantastic pairings, and I know we're going to turn the camera off, but I think we'll just stand here with the crew and continue to eat these delicious things. So.
Definitely.